Thought I'd do it this way. That way I
Easier.
can record it.
There we go. Good
That
deal.
allows me, if we talk about things that I need to trigger my memory on, I've got it for later.
Sounds good.
Not that I ever get out of a phone or a meeting and then forget it.
If it makes you feel better, I think that's a universal human thing. So,
I mean well, but as soon as I get out of the meeting, I move to the next thing and I look back and go, oh, I never followed through with that. So I'm trying to pull up that document you sent the other day. Where are you? Oh, that's right. The other thing I got to figure out is why your text messages don't notify me. You're like one of like two people that, for some reason, when your messages come through, they just come through, but I don't get a notification. So like
interesting.
if I'm away from my phone, it doesn't ding, and then I came back to bed. I'm like, oh, Jeremy texted me. I missed that. So I don't know why that is. Someday I'll
No,
figure it out.
yeah, I don't know.
It's your stealthness. You just
Yeah.
so I like what you're thinking. Talk to me. What's
Yeah. So I've been thinking about like post graduation and us working together, like doing like more intentionally, etc. I was wondering, could this potentially be the first thing I just do with you? Like just pick up this ball and run with it.
yeah.
Uh, it's something I'm crazy passionate about. It's something I'd want to do anyway. It's something I think there's a huge need for across the board. And in terms of like I know sometimes like when we're trying to figure stuff out, like you, me, Tiger, and Chris, it can almost be like, well, who's taking what part or who's going to do this? Like the four of us
Yeah.
can discuss something. We'll all agree, like, that's a good idea, but then who's going to do something with it? And I was like, if it's helpful, if you're like, no, man, don't mess with it or whatever, that's fine. But if it's helpful, post graduation, I'd be happy to make this kind of like my first
So can I
art
be
project.
this bold to say,
Yeah.
if I could use this language, which I don't think we care, we don't have to give the disclaimers. But my hesitation is always, I would like to see the Jesus cohort scale.
Yeah.
And for it to scale, it needs what you just shared. But my hesitation is I don't want to ask already busy people to do things that I don't know would fit within the flow of their lives.
Yeah.
So my answer to your question is praise God, run free, Forrest. Now, obviously, it's kind of fit within what the flow,
Right.
what we're thinking. But I mean, like, if you're like, yeah, I'm really, really, really passionate about forming a lemonade stand for the Jesus cohort, I don't know what that means, but one of the things that's interesting to me is I am very passionate about what you just shared too. I would love to see you kind of flesh out like what is that? What does that look like? What does that mean? And here's the reason why I quit. Not because I need anything involved with it. It's just like as I talk about what Matt is looking for in his church is how do we help people be formed well
Hmm.
in the ways of Jesus, specifically in the realm of what he calls kind of the spiritual disciplines behind that.
Yeah.
But when he talks about spiritual disciplines, he's still kind of got a little bit of that. Have you read Donald Whitney's? Do you know Donald Whitney? He has a book called kind of the spiritual disciplines for the Christian life. And they're all
Oh,
good, but it's still more of a kind of an evangelical, you know what I'm getting? It's
yeah.
not as contemplative as Dallas Willard's
Right.
or what's his noodle? Richard Foster, those
Oh
kinds
yeah,
of
yeah.
guys. It's more of like, and some people could say spiritual disciplines, and you and I would kind of go, oh yeah, we know what we're talking. But when evangelicals talk about spiritual disciplines, it's more of like, here's how to read your Bible better, and here's how to pray better, and here's how to
But the thing
fast. And it's a
is,
little less of more of a contemplative type of approach,
yeah.
but
But the good news is even with that, it doesn't almost matter what door of the house you walk through. The point is once you get in that house, you're going to start.
yes,
So I don't, I mean, unless they're just like psycho or hyper Calvinistic or something like that,
yeah,
I'm almost indifferent to like how they want to come to that. Because I mean,
yes,
I might be like, hey, I have a slightly different flavor. I think you're kind of slightly missing it. But it's almost of like, you know, it's almost like sports. I want my kid to be healthy and active. I prefer basketball. But if they start really talking about hockey and getting into hockey, it's like, okay, that's not my flavor. But you know what? It's going to get to the same end result that I'm really hoping for
Yep.
anyway.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yeah, and
I'm
that's very much where he's at, where he knows what he knows,
Mhm.
but his heart is to lead them into practices that will help form them in the ways of Jesus. And so he's intrigued by what we're doing with the Jesus cohort, but doesn't necessarily know the fullness of it. So we're kind of having that conversation. So the reason why I bring him up is like, what in your mind does this thing that you sent me the other day kind of look like fleshed out? And if what your answer is, well, I would need to go flesh that out, then
Yeah.
great. I'm fine with that. Um, I'm just interested to hear kind of the thoughts that are running through your brain, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, so for a lot of people that are actually in church ministry, they they can't just start all over. Or many of them aren't going to. They're not going to go start their own church or plant their own church. Um and they also want to know, how do I do this where it's more than just me and like five friends of mine who are kind of into this stuff and passionate about it. Like, I want to see my whole church adopt this, or I want it to see become a big part of who we are, but I don't know how to do that. And so, like, and you'll understand what most poet pastors are really good at are either preaching sermons or running programs. And so they're like, but to how to change the structure and nature of an organization, they don't they don't really know. And so what I would say is like, okay, how do we help people take what it is they do, their church, and build a plan to make formation normal and doable
It's
in
great.
their context.
It's
And
great.
so a lot of it though is like starting out depending on where they're at and what stuff like it's basically like, and this is what we talked about before. It's like, first you got to give your people a right view of God. You know, if and maybe they're already there. Okay, so fine. They already have a right view of God. They view God as good and loving. Secondly, do they view their like, and this goes like, um, does the words, and we can phrase it however we want, but Jesus as Lord, like, do they actually view God having any type of input and authoritative uh power over their day-to-day life? Because that's the problem with most church people. It's like, yeah, they love Jesus. They're not even bad. They might even be like crazy nationalists or anything like that, but they're just kind of doing their life separate from God. Like, hey, when I die, I'll go to heaven. But they don't realize, like, and so that's where like a lot of the spiritual disciplines really can yield fruit is you like, hey, as you start to structure your life around hearing from God, it's going to impact the way you parent. It's going to impact the way you behave at work. It's going to impact all these kind of things, and your people will act. And then here's the thing: like, most church leaders, they want their people to show up, they want them to give, and they want them to serve. And those are all good, necessary things. But without a deeply formed life, you're going to get less and less people who are like that, because there's no social pressure to do that anymore. There's
Yeah.
no obligation to be a part of some sort of community gathering or some sort of like, some people used to be, well, I serve at my church or I serve on my school board. Now people don't care at all because no one knows anybody. Like, nobody has real close friendships. Nobody has any. And so a lot of churches, like, I'm like, they've made their whole formation serve, give, attend.
Mm-hmm.
And people just kind of did that anyway because they were going to do something like that somewhere. And so I tell people, like, I could tell church leaders, like, yeah, those are still good things, but you've got to go backwards now and do heart level stuff so that they become the kind of people who naturally do those things anyway. And if you do the heart level stuff, they're going to do way more than that. They're going to be good neighbors. They're going to be, one of the things that we've been talking about, like at our church, is like helping people love their neighbors well increases our attendance without us having to try. You
Yeah.
know, uh, because then the people themselves will start making connections about, well, wait a second, I should bring my friend to this, or I should be, something like that. So, um, obviously, this won't work at every church or anything, but for the ones that are hungry for it, that want to, it's it's more about giving them frameworks about, okay, like, and like that I put in that document, like, you don't have to not do home groups. You don't have to not do life groups and make it all formation classes, but you can structure how you do groups in such a way that it incorporates this stuff, that it can implement this stuff. And honestly, for a lot of these people, and this is where the cohort part would be able to make, like, this could be some of our bread and butter here. We could do a 6 week training, but then we could also do like a 2 year coaching with them where it's like, hey, because you can't do this overnight. So we'll do like a 6 week intensive and whatever, but then we'll do like a 2 year contract with a monthly check-in and maybe a site visit, once every 6 months or
Yeah.
once a year, like that. And I mean, not to think straight revenue stream, but
No, but you've got to think it, right? Yeah.
yeah. And so that's what that was kind of what I was thinking about with all of
Okay.
that. So I don't know if that
So
answers the question or
no,
not.
it does, and in some ways I just go, well, I don't need to know it, but on the other hand, there's just the curiosity side because I'm all probably my greatest strength is my greatest weakness is I have to see the big picture before I can move.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, there's a thought of just like Jeremy, just run, be free, go do this, and yes, the Jesus cohort can be your platform. But then there's this other side of me that goes, how do they all tie together? Like how to like the Jesus story, Jesus way, Jesus people kind of thing tie. How do we build things that would strengthen what you're talking about? Would that be in conjunction with what we talked about the other day, or would these things be separate from? It's those kind of conversations that roll around in my head. So as you kind of run with it, if you have thoughts about how we could, for lack of a better term, streamline those things so they're all kind of moving in the same direction, I'd be very
Yeah.
open to your thoughts there.
I think I think in terms of like channels, like we kind of like the Jesus cohort is an umbrella
Yeah.
under which several things exist.
Yeah.
At some point, we're going to have a very robust restorative branch of what we do. Like we'll have courses, we'll have at some point, depending on how things go, we'll have counselors and spiritual directors and other things that we can refer people to. We'll have, you know, healing retreats, workshops, weekends or something like that. So that's one branch. There's the branch of just people who want to dive into the Jesus story, the Jesus community, like people who are like, hey, I love everything you're doing. I have no community. I have no,
Yeah.
there's not a church around me that wants to do this stuff. I'm the only one. So then there's that stuff where we're like, hey, we kind of serve as the community. And then there's the churches that do want to do this stuff. And that's another branch or another stream, another channel, whatever terminology you want to use. And so as you talk about like for the future of the church, uh that's where I think of it as, it's like this is a channel. And
Okay.
so they don't, each of the channels are under the umbrella of Jesus cohort. They don't necessarily though all bleed into each other, except for the fact that same values, same ethos, same whatever.
Yeah.
But
And I kind of use this, it's a platform for all things Jesus, either restorative, formational, communal.
yeah,
So umbrella is the same kind of idea. In your mind, this thing though would, what you're talking about would exist fairly outside of what we're currently doing.
it'd be a new branch. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Because
Yeah.
like what I think about too though is, and maybe even, I mean, here's where it could cross pollinate. Like what happens when we get a few people that are in the same geographic area? Like right now we have some Kansas City folk, right? Or whatever, something like that. What if we get a couple people that are all in like, I don't know, the Atlanta area? I don't know, I'm just making something up. And they're like, well, we want to start something like this. Like
Yes.
how do we do that? Where it's not
Yes.
just us coming on Thursday night or Friday. Like how do we make this something that's like embedded and embodied, to use your term, here in our area? And it's like, okay, well, hey, we have a whole track, a whole program, a whole branch that helps people form churches that are about this. And in some ways, I think about like there's all kind of church planting organizations that basically teach you how to draw a crowd and do a Sunday morning service. And whatever, I'm not mad about it. That was the way for however many decades. This is going to be the way of the future, where it's like,
Yes.
hey, you got 15 people. You don't need to figure out a building right now. You need to figure out how to like be deeply formed and love your neighbors well. And like, well, what about the sermon? Guess what? There's 1,000 of them on YouTube. You have your next 3 years. You can just watch that if that's what you really want. Well, what about
Yeah.
worship? You can sing together with whatever band you like. What you can't replicate though is this part. And so
Boy, I mean, this is hitting at a time that I go, this is one of the major areas I feel the Lord's calling. I mean, if I were to be honest, the other day, that thing in spiritual direction, I was not expecting him to be quite as bold. And when I say bold, I don't mean like telling me what to do.
right.
I mean, in the sense of like the things that are stirring in my heart. Like he went so far to say, Doug, he told his own story. He's part of church there in Long Beach. I mean, this guy teaches at Biola, spiritual formation. He's a spiritual director. He's probably in his 60s. I mean, this guy's a seasoned, I don't know, maybe he's not in his 60s. I don't know. 50s. He's older than me. Let's put it that way. Seasoned veteran pastor. And yet he's part of this young church. And he says, probably they probably have the best worship in the city. Good teaching, young, energized. And he says, but my wife and I feel like we are at someone else's family Christmas. He says, there's really no pathway for us to actively become a part of that community. And so he started talking about how almost all of what he does for churches is outside of the traditional church context. And I mean, you've heard me for 4+ years now talk about, I feel like it's going to need to be new stuff. But one of the things he says, Doug, I'm telling you, as he was talking about all the things he does outside of church context, he said, I can't meet with numerous and countless individuals that are church leaders, pastors. He said, almost all of them, he said, are people that if I were starting a church or I was a pastor, I would want them on my staff. And he said, almost all of them exist outside of traditional church structures right now. Almost all of them. And in some ways, his way of saying like they're existing in kind of the spiritual wilderness. And he said this is the part that I just really, and he says, and I don't think they ever should, because I believe that God is doing a work outside of that, because you cannot put new wine into old wineskins. And to me, that's the thing that's been bubbling for the longest time now, is like, even take Word of Life. I'm just you and I here, even though it's being recorded. Love so much of what they're about, what they're doing, but it's still kind of the traditional church structure with just new theological teaching and a more contemplative, liturgical, ancient practices. They do, communion on every Sunday, things like that. But it's not really that much different in a church. And to me, that's the next wave, to make the point you're making. That next wave is we've had kind of this theological renovation where so many people are like, yes, we prescribe to what N.T. Wright told us, right? This kind of gospel of the kingdom kind of thing. But we're still taking that and putting them in church services that are about gathering people, making it about preaching. What did you say? Serve, give, and I don't remember.
Attend, yeah.
Attend, right? And yet I don't get an overwhelming sense that my kids, if I could be like that, whether they could articulate it or not, they're not really that interested in that. And this is what I said to Ron. I said, like, that younger generation is going, if it's not authentic, if it's not embodied, if it's not promoting the ways of love in Jesus, they're just, why am I doing this? And COVID, as you and I've talked, kind of just ripped that Band-Aid right off, right? Where it's like, I can get pretty much everything I would get at church somewhere else. And some people bemoan that. And I look at it and go, this is an opportunity for us to really begin to lead the church into something different. But the real rubs Wednesday was, he basically was like, you are lamenting and grieving and holding on to a traditional system because you have a shepherd's heart. You want those people to experience what you know they could experience in church and life and family and love and all of those things. But he goes, but it's probably not going to ever happen within that traditional structure. And it was just like something in that moment, I just felt like I let it go. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, so then it's time to start exploring, what does that look like? And if I were to be this bold, it looks like some form of, I don't want to say planting, but some form of forming something, probably in the Kansas City area. And so I say all that long-windedness to go, this does not feel like, oh, Jeremy Jones has got a good idea, let's just run with it. This feels like the perfect thing for the Jesus cohort. And in some ways, I get to be a part of that because I need it for myself.
Yeah.
So I'm really stoked about this. I'm glad I recorded this too, so Frankie can listen. You're talking a lot about how to lead a church into something. Do you see it would be just as relevant for someone who's forming something
Oh yeah.
as it would be for someone who's already in existing structures trying
Yeah,
to
because
move it somewhere?
it's the same, like it would be two different I wouldn't put those two groups of people together. But I would say we both channels or both branches are definitely necessary. Like
When
so
you
for the
say that, do you mean that in like in a formal cohort kind of way? I wouldn't put
yeah,
them together, or you just mean in your mental capacities you wouldn't put them
both.
together?
Both. Because here's the deal, like if you already have 250 people at your church, you can't go back and start over.
Yeah,
You got to figure out, how do I grow towards this and not burn everything down?
yeah,
Um, Unless you're just like, that's what I want to do, in which case that's fine. That's different. That's a different story. But for, like I said, and so what you're talking about then is like, how do I shepherd and how do I lead people towards changes that, and you're basically moving at a slower pace. Um, for people that are starting from the very beginning, you just simply say, this is what we're committing to. Like it's the difference between like if it's a blank page, you can say, no, we're going to start this way. Hold on, I got to plug in my computer. It's going to die here on me in a second. Uh, Over here to a different spot. But if you're birthing something new, then what you have to, you focus on different things, because what you already have is the values. What you need to learn to figure out is, how do you structure this?
yeah,
Uh, the existing church already has structure, and you're trying to integrate new values, new rhythms, et cetera, stuff like that. The problem with most things that are getting birthed, especially in this world, is they're high on ideals, they're high on like dreams, and they don't know what to do beyond. They don't know how to take it. Like there's five people who already all think this way. They don't know how to take it beyond that. So if it's ever going to
yeah,
be more than just a small little house church, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, God used those all throughout history. But if we're like, hey, I don't want this just to be the five of us in my living room for the next 6 years. Like, how do we embody this in such a way that it affects our neighbors, our community? Like, how do we do this in such a way that new people can be welcomed into it? Well, that's a completely different approach and set of problems than the church of 200 people already, or something like that. And
yeah.
so I would keep them separate, because they're wrestling with completely different things, because they're coming from completely different directions. Even though a lot of this, like I said, even though 20 years down the road, hopefully they're kind of in the same place. It's I mean, I would keep them separate as much as possible.
Cool, cool. Well, dude, this is awesome. I'm it gives me even greater clarity as to what you sent the other night. So I'm looking forward to seeing. I mean, I figure at least 12, 13 minutes from now you'll have all of this finished, right?
Fortunately, I gotta finish a paper and some other things. So
All right. Well, Listen, I don't need to keep you, but I'd say run with this, and I would love to just kind of keep them as things are developing, send it my way, because I just want to kind of be a part of that process of hearing it, because I'm excited about where this could go.
Yeah, awesome. Good deal then. So
Let me do something here real quick. So, all right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Cool, dude. I'm excited about this. And I'm excited that you're almost finished. It does, I have to admit, it does seem like you just started your master's program and now you're almost done. I know for you, it doesn't probably seem like that, but for me, it does.
It flew by. It flew by.
What's it been? Has it been 2 or 3?
It's just 2. It's just 2 years. That's why it goes by
Still,
fast.
man, that's wild and crazy. So, all right, well, I'll let you get to it.
All right, man.
Thanks, man. Have a great weekend. We'll see you.
Yep.
Bye.